Hello and welcome to Soul Symbols. My name is Shelley. I'm a writer, an astrologer, and a card reader, and I'd like to welcome you to my channel. Happy Friday. We are doing something kind of different today. It was requested in one of the comments, and I thank you so much for the follower and the person who viewed the video that made the suggestion. I'm very grateful because I want to put out the content that you expect to see as related to tarot. And what we're doing today is I was asked to show a video of the collection of tarot and oracle decks that I have, specifically tarot. And so what I did is what you see here is you see my collection. This is a collection of tarot only. In one of the previous videos, I had quoted the tarot deck side of it as being 13 decks. It is actually 18 decks. And as you can tell, I've tried to do a formal count, but I keep losing count, and I know that's kind of scary, please don't judge me. But the tarot decks that I have are very carefully selected, and I have purchased them over the course of several years, and the tarot side of my deck collection do make up about one-fourth of the total number of decks that I own, including playing card decks and dice and other things. Most of the time, decks range anywhere from $5 if they're playing cards, all the way up to $80, sometimes $100, depending on the different type of deck that it is. Now, I was grateful to do this video because what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it into several videos. So we don't, in the vein of not having one ridiculously long video, and this one is going to be probably the longest video out of the whole series because it's the most number of decks. I am going to go into, what I will do is I'll go ahead and show you the deck. I know this time of year, if you're watching this at the time that it posts, we're coming up on the holiday season, and those who are interested in card reading, those who are interested in tarot, finding a good tarot deck, seeing what it looks like beforehand is really important. And I'll also share what you see here is some of the favorite cards, like I refer to it as the card that sold me on the deck, is right on top. And so what we will do is we will go into a little bit of history and the nuances of the deck, and why I bought it. And if you ever want to skip to a specific deck, it is starting like 1, 2, 3, and it kind of meanders. It goes 1 through, and the timestamps are below. Also, I am going to be posting other videos with my oracle decks, and I'm going to kind of categorize them to make it easier. That way you can just kind of click and watch the content that you want. Some of the decks are self-help, some of them are more earth magic, some of them are spiritual, like I'll do a separate angel deck reading. And I will, you may see some of the tarot decks show up in those readings as well, but this video specifically is the tarot decks that I own. One other disclaimer is, being a card reader, I do use decks which are published by publishing houses. Therefore, I just want to say, because these are the materials that I use in my readings, but it is still someone's intellectual property. If you see it here, it means that it is of good quality and it is a part of my collection, which is very carefully curated. So that is a big kudos to that publishing house. But I mean no infringement in showing the images that are displayed here. And the images displayed here are just to act as a review. I get no incentive for showing the decks, and also just to say as feedback, as positive feedback for the quality of the decks. I will be going into certain histories, especially when it comes to the traditional tarot, just so the watcher has a better understanding. Also, if I did find any flaws with the decks or anything that I noticed as a nuance, I am going to be mentioning it. But it definitely, I'm a very positive person. If you see the deck here, it's because I love it. It would never, all of these decks here I think are going to be in, my collection for a very long time. Now, the beginning of the video, we are going to talk about the traditional tarot. So I'm going to start with that. And just so you know, it's going to be a little chunk of time that goes through the background history of the original authors of the original tarot. Also, there are timestamps. There was another watcher who had posted about the Thoth tarot, Thoth, and we're going to talk about that too. So there's a very long and beautiful history to how the tarot came to be, and so we're gonna go over all of that, and that's going to be the beginning segment of this video. So just bear that in mind, and the timestamps are there. Click on them as you need. The very first timestamp would be for the A.G. Waite. The A.G. Mueller A.E. Waite deck. All right, that said, disclaimer over, let's get into it. First off, I am stupid excited to do this video. I'm amazed at how much energy I have for it. I was really looking forward to it because when I started my tarot channel, I had 3 decks. I had this one, and this one. And the reason I started reading tarot is because I felt like it was like a way for me to help kind of exercise the emotions within myself. I say it every video. I look at tarot as if it's dream interpretation, seeing the symbols and cards. It's very therapeutic to me. And, seeing as that I was getting so into it, and I knew I was getting into it, I wanted to share that with others. The other thing is having this many decks, again, this being my form of self-therapy, and let me assure you that the cumulative cost of all the decks that I own is a small margin, of what the benefit that this has brought to me. And I'm not saying that to encourage you to spend a bunch of money. Absolutely not. I'm hoping that what I hope you take away from this video is that you find 1 or 2 decks that really are the right fit for you, because that's the other thing that this video is gonna clarify, is that the different decks for different people, and finding the right one is very difficult. It's a challenge, and you want to know as much as possible. Now, the other thing that other quick disclaimer I wanted to say is that I am a writer. I am also a published author. I'm a self-published author. But before I became self-published, I also had interactions with formal publishing houses. And publishing has changed a lot over the years. It's evolved. And so I have scrapbooked for 20 years. I have journaled for 30 years. I have been published. I know what I am familiar with the paradigm shift with digital and traditional publishing, and all of that has contributed to my knowledge of, when you look at a deck that was published over 100 years ago, what it was like. So that's another thing that's really important in this, is understanding those kind of nuances. So we're going to go ahead and begin. I am beginning with the traditional tarot deck. This deck here, this one that you see here, is Art Nouveau, and that was my official formal first deck. The second deck that I actually learned tarot on is the Morgan Greer that's here. But when I decided, I had purchased several more decks, but before I started my channel here on YouTube, I decided that, I said I need a traditional Rider-Waite deck. If I want to how to tarot, if I want to, have a traditional, because that's what started it all. But the interesting thing is that the Rider-Waite-Smith was a pinnacle. It was a turning point in the age of tarot, but it was not the beginning. The beginning of tarot began in the 1600s as a fortune-telling game. And it was an Italian fortune-telling game, almost like Kipper, and actually later when we get into Kipper decks, we'll revisit this history. But it started as almost like, like a lady and a lord and a, thief and and a child. It was like piecing together a story through looking at the cards. And then later it became, it got picked up by French, a French understanding, and it kind of navigated Europe. And then it took on more of an occultist and more of a spiritual kind of, the tarot that we know today. Now, what you see, and actually I'm going to post a really great link. There's a link that talks about it. It really answers that question. And the person who posted asking about Thoth. I am still learning about Thoth, and actually this article that I'm posting below really helped enlighten me to see the meanings of that. It talks about how Thoth came into it. What happened was, in the turn of the century, at the early 19th century, you know, author Edward Waite, Waite, decided that he wanted to interpret these cards. And again, look at there's a very brief article that talks about the timeline of how tarot cards became the modern version that we see today. He had a new vision for tarot cards, because it used to be more Lenormand based. It was more like playing cards, very pip deck. And actually, as we go through, we're going to talk about pip. Pip is when the minors, if it's the 5 of swords, you just see 5 swords, right? Almost like a deck of playing cards. It has no majors. Here, he had an envision of the traditional tarot that was based on the 1600 version. And he was author Edward Waite was a spiritualist, and he needed someone very talented, and who he was dedicated to his craft, and the fact that he wanted someone talented to bring to life his vision of the tarot. And that dedication really came through the partnership of the Rider Publishing Company, Pamela Colman Smith, and author Edward Waite. And one clarification, and one specification that I just want to go through real quick, is that a lot of times, and in this day and age, it's very true, at the turn of the century, people of different ethnicities, people of color, and women were not considered the equals of, more of, it was a patriarchal system. And a lot of times, and this is going to come up, and I have to preface this because this is, as we're talking about a history of a tarot, this is going to come up. And when you look at the history of it, it does boil down to, because what happened was Pamela Colman Smith, her name is on the tarot deck, but she was paid the wages that she would be at that time. But in her defense, that was actually probably the best that she could have, because most of the time she would not even have her name on the deck at that time in history, right? And I don't want this to cast a shadow on author Edward Waite, because he was the visionary, right? He hired Pamela Colman Smith to draw the art. And if I have to be completely honest and blunt with it, artist, when you think about it, when you go on Facebook and you share that cartoon artwork that's not yours, you've paid nothing for it, that artist doesn't make anything from that, right? And in this digital world, we're seeing that a lot more. It's the same thing when, and as a writer, I published a book, and you really do not make a whole lot of money, right? The chances of you becoming as big an author as the big names that you see out there are like minuscule. It's like you have a better chance of winning the lottery than you do than having the type of fame that a J.K. Rowling, right? So it is kind of in the same vein. And in a minute, we're going to talk about the life of Pamela Colman Smith, because I am not downplaying her life. I think she was amazing. And we are about to talk about how amazing she was. But what plays into it is that but we do need to, what I'm stressing is that we do need to give credit to the fact that none of this, the traditional tarot as we know it, would not exist if it were not for the vision and the persistence of Arthur Edward Waite. So his name having the equal title on the deck is no different than the rest of the decks that we see, because the rest of the decks that you see will always see co-authorship. You will see the person who had the vision and who decided to publish it, the person who wrote the names and created the image, and the actual artist who created the images. And that is a partnership that you will see. That's an emperor and an empress. And honestly, that's how I think of the traditional tarot. It's like A.E. Waite, he was the emperor, and Pamela Colman Smith, she was definitely the mother of this deck. So that said, is that Pamela Colman Smith, to go ahead and get into a very brief history, she was born of a Jamaican mother and a white father. And she was the beautiful thing about her heritage, just to touch on that a little bit, because I think she was amazing. Her mother was the sister of Samuel Colman. Samuel Colman is a painter. He is an artist. You can go to the Smithsonian or the National Museum of Art. You can go to New York and see his paintings on the wall. Her father was the brother of the mayor of Brooklyn in New York. So she, in her own right, she's American, and she's almost like American royalty in a lot of ways. She spent a majority of her years in England because her family traveled. She had spent time in England. She spent time in Brooklyn. Also, there's another really great reader here on YouTube. Her name is Jalissa, and she's so cute. She's from Brooklyn. Pamela Colman-Smith is from Brooklyn. That's actually where she got her formal education. So, she incredibly talented woman. But she was born, and she had all of the talent of her uncle. She had all of the authority of her other uncle on her father's side. And her father was a very hard worker. She also traveled much to Jamaica. She had a heart. Her heart was really in Jamaica. There was a lot of publications that she did based on the folklore and the tradition and the heritage in Jamaica. But as she grew up in London, and then she came back to Brooklyn for a while. She came back to New York, and she got her formal college education in New York City. Crazy thing is she became a very talented pen artist. Her artwork, as you can see, and just to point this out, when I went on my retreat, the host of the retreat was Mary Kay Greer, and she does have a wonderful book called Pamela Colman-Smith, Untold Story. And it not only has all of her artwork, it has a lot of the beautiful penmanship. The other thing is it also shows how her artwork evolved. I thought it was really neat. It talked about the inspiration that she used to create the cards. So a lot of the cards, when Pamela Colman-Smith finally created the traditional tarot deck as we know it, it was based on A.E. Waite's inspiration and how it was depicted of her. But also, just to wrap up, Pamela Colman-Smith, she got her education in New York. While she was in New York, she made a name for herself, and she very quickly got jobs because she seemed pretty single throughout her life, but she was a very independent woman. She was also very spiritual. There were times that she was more occultist, and then there were times that she actually, after she penned the tarot, she switched to being Catholic for a very long time. But as she was going along her spiritual journey, she crossed paths with Bram Stoker, as in Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula. How freaking cool is that? And one of her first jobs was to illustrate a book about Terry Allen, who was an actress. As she was getting to know the subject of her illustrations, she began to tour with Terry Allen. And as she toured with Terry Allen, she got inspiration for so many things. She got inspiration for publishing. She got inspiration for acting and more illustration. I feel like theater, and being from New York, theater and artistic expression and artistry and her art just are just so hand in hand. Now, the way that she filled her life is that she continued to tour with Bram Stoker and Terry Allen. But as she edited several magazines and newspapers, and she also created a newspaper called Greenleaf, which was produced and contained the work of so many women. And, at the turn of the century in 1905, that was very rare. She also returned to England for a time, and she was a very big advocate for women's suffrage, for the woman's right to vote in England. And then after the popularity of the tarot deck, she she got paid what she got paid for it, but I do think that she was very cut out of it. And it's amazing as we go through the different tarot decks that you see today. We're going to talk a little bit about how, how publishing rights really played into that. But unfortunately, she did pass away. She passed away in 1951, and she was pretty penniless at the time. Her family had money. But a lot of the publishing that she didn't make money. Just like I said, authors don't make money. It's almost like a work of art. But it is always inspiring to me that the work that she did, the way that she lived, she didn't, she didn't feel like she had to be married to take care of herself. She tried to take care of herself. But I will just say, just like many artists, I think the way that we can combat her to stand up for Pamela Colman Smith is to give artists their due. Try to pay artists for their work if possible. And I think that's the best way to honor her legacy and everyone else. Now, to get into the traditional tarot, the first tarot deck, the one that was commissioned by A.E. Waite, it has the name Rider-Waite-Smith. And again, her name is in the title. It's RWS. It's so classic. And the Rider-Waite-Smith came out in 1909. And what it is that when it first got produced, they didn't, just like the publishing house was Rider, and it was in UK, it was in England. And of course, just like any publishing house, you don't know how well the book is going to do. You don't know how well the deck is going to do. But they did a very small print run at first. I think they don't even know how many print copies. I think maybe 20 to 50. And of that original run, there's only 4 in existence today. And if anybody knows where that is on display in museum, even if that's in England, I will fly to England to see that. I don't know where you can see an original deck of the Rider-Waite-Smith. Now, what you will see is that on the first edition of the Rider-Waite-Smith, there is something called the Lilies back. And what that is that's that original first run of 20 or 50 copies that had the blue, white, and blue lilies. And what you'll see is that in more recent editions, they imitate that because that was the rare first edition copy. Now, after that first run, that first run took off, right? Rider Publishing Company sold out of the blue and lilies back. So they went ahead and they changed the back to what we see today, which is what we call the traditional crackle back. And the crackle back is what you see on the second edition, and that came out closer to 1910. And they did a much larger run, and those are the copies that you might actually see you might actually find an original mint copy. It's very, very rare because, of course, at this point, these decks, the original deck would be 110 years old, if not more. But what happened was and just to go into a little bit of history, I'm going to link several videos in the description box below of how I learned about this. And I'm a stickler for the quality of the deck because I said, okay, when I start my YouTube channel, I want it to be a quality Rider-Waite-Smith. And I had no idea. I was really, the moment I said, let me find a quality Rider-Waite-Smith, I fell down a rabbit hole, guys. It was follow the white rabbit because there is so much history to this deck. And it just starts with Rider-Waite-Smith. And what it is that Pamela Colman Smith, sometime in her lifetime, was given the nickname Pixie. And this is going to become important in a minute. But what happened was, the Rider Publishing Company sold out of the blue and white lilies. Then all of a sudden they started creating the cracklebacks, and they knew they had a bestseller, right? Even though it's a tarot deck, it's a bestseller, right? It's not a book, but it's a printed copy of something. And what happened is they started printing them like crazy, right? It really took off like gangbusters. But what happened was this was right around 1910. And they kept selling as they were printing copies, they kept selling. And Rider Publishing Company is based in England. Now, later on, towards the 30s, the publishing rights for the deck got transferred to a Switzerland company, right? And then later in the early 70s or early 60s, you'll see what you see today, which is the US Games. US Games eventually bought the copyright for the deck. Now, what's important to remember about the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith is that the original deck, the original plates, because when you think about it, at the turn of the century, the way that you would print copies of books or cards is that you had an original like metal plate that would print out the images. What happened is you had World War I and World War II in between. Somewhere between 1912, which was right around the Great War, and then sometime between the 30s and 40s, the original plates of Colman's work got destroyed, or at least they say they got destroyed. And what you see, and there's 2 videos in the description box below that talk about the history. What happened was, after the plates got destroyed, you didn't have the original method of printing out the images, right? And of course, the original artwork is not around anymore. All we have is the original decks, which can be scanned, or with today's technology, we can try to make it as clear as possible. But what is suspicious about it is that a lot of tarot connoisseurs, what we do is we go ahead and we have something called versions of Pam, which is Pamela Colman Smith. Pam A is the original version. Like it was a scan or some kind of digital copy, something that was saved originally by the publisher in 1910 that has the clearest version of her original artwork. And what you will see is what's difficult is that some of the coloring, some of the what you'll see is that later when I decided to go with the A.G. Mueller deck, there was a reason, and it's because the images are very sharp. But what you'll see is that finding original images of her artwork before it went missing or destroyed in the Second World War is very, very difficult. And as you get reproductions, it becomes Pam B or Pam C or Pam D. And the way that you can kind of tell, and actually there's another video I'm posting below that's really quite cute, is that the 2 biggest cards that you can tell what happened is with the Lovers and with the Sun. With the Sun, it's really cute. There's the reason I went with my deck is because I started following a really wonderful YouTube reader. Her name is Mindful Tarot, and she's amazing. She has such energy, and what it was is that she was able to point out that in a Pam A, an original Pamela Colman Smith image, there's 2 discerning factors when it comes to the Sun. The first discerning factor is a little squiggle here next to where the number of the card is. And what it is that it almost looks like she was trying to make another ray beam, but she didn't have enough space. And it's really quite cute. Mindful Tarot, she refers to it, and pardon my French, there is language, she refers to it as the oh shit. Oh shit, I put a line there and that oops, oops. So that's the oops line. And then the second image is that there's a little sunflower that's to the right that actually has seeds in it. And the controversy is that when you look at Pam B, Pam C, Pam D versions, they are scans upon scans upon scans. And because what you think about it is, if the ownership right transferred to U.S. Games sometime in the 60s or early 70s, all they had at that time was either photography, because there were no scanners, or whatever digital imprint that they had at the time. And what happens is when you have scan upon scan upon scan, it first off omits the squiggle on the Sun, and it also takes out the seeds from the right. It's almost like photoshopping over time, right? And it becomes very blurry. So there are very few decks that were actually considered Pam A. Like up until the 80s, you see that kind of, I call it a ripple effect. The original artwork was lost in the 30s, 40s. And when you think about it, if you lose something that's only 30 years old, that's like losing artwork from the 90s now, which seems like a long time ago, but how are you supposed to know that some kind of piece of art from the 90s is going to remain in popularity for over 100 years? That also contributes to conspiracy theory that I have that I'm going to talk about in a minute. But the other one is that with the lovers, the angel's eyes are supposed to be closed. They're not supposed to be opened. Also, there's a little bit of a blob that's kind of to the left, to the right of Eve. But what I'm going to do is there's two really great videos that help me clarify these kind of differences. But basically what happened was reproductions over time became really, really messy. They became really thick-lined. You lost a lot of the nuance. You lost a lot of the detail. And it became really ugly to read. It became a caricature of the original artwork, which is not what tarot readers want, right? They want Pixie's work, right? They want Pixie's original work. And what happened is, and it actually, makes me really feel for it. It makes me appreciative and grateful for the technology that we have today. But what had happened was, there's something called a right of rescission. There's a stale date on published works. In Europe, and I'm honestly not certain if it's the same in the U.S., someone's artistic work becomes public use, meaning that anyone can use it without having to pay the owner of the copyright 70 years after the original author of the work has passed. So A.E. Waite, and this is where it gets controversial, A.E. Waite passed away in 1942. And U.S. Games owns the copyright to Rider-Waite-Smith tarot. But Waite was not the only author on the deck, right? Now, this is where I think it does toes the line of being a little bit hypocritical, because, Pamela Colman Smith could be paid no incentive other than the initial compensation for her original work throughout her life on what was to become a best-selling tarot deck for over 110 years. But yet, what happens, and again, this is no fault of the publishing companies, this is just a legal, nuance. Writer A.E. Waite passed away in 1942. So 1942. His part in the authorship of the deck expired, the right of ownership expired in 2012. And you better believe all of a sudden you see it's on like Donkey Kong, people can start printing or publishing the images of quote unquote his work. But then, so what you see is that this deck that I have was published right around 2016. And the reason that I think it waited 4 years is because Pamela Colman Smith did not pass away until 1951. If you take 70 years from 1951, that would be 2021. So that's where I'm really raising an eyebrow, guys, where like next year it might be on like Donkey Kong, because then all three authors of this deck will have officially been passed away for more than 7 years, and then copyright ownership is going to be a freaking heyday. What you see is that around the 80s, the blurry decks of the tarot really started running rampant. It really, the print quality was just not the same because the original deck was lost for so long. So what we had to do is that we really had to say, okay, what's more important here? Yes, I could cartoon color, these pictures, but the little cross-hatching, the little nuances, the oh shit squiggle on the sun, those are important, right? Those are important. And these little nuances in Pixie's work was important. Now, what I think is a little bit of my conspiracy theory, and this is where it gets funny, is that I noticed that I'd noticed that this deck got published around 2016, and it's published by A.G. Mueller, which is a German company. And the German company acquired a Switzerland company. And what I think is interesting is that in the UK, Rider was acquired by a Switzerland company. And then the plates, quote unquote, mysteriously got destroyed in World War II. Then later on, a German publishing company acquires the Switzerland company, and now all of a sudden, 70 years passed, more than 70 years passed, 74 years past the time that A.E. Waite has passed away, which would give it a free right of clearance to reproduce his work at no cost, no fiscal contribution to the copyright owner, which would be U.S. Games. All of a sudden, a very, very clear deck, like with the original colors and with the original seeds and with, the angel's eye closed, starts to be produced by A.G. Mueller without, allegedly without the plates. And this is where I'm curious. Does A.G. Mueller have the plates? Do they have Pixie's artwork? Because what's interesting about this deck, and I went ahead and I got this deck in English. There were different languages. I bought this deck from a Ukraine company, and I bought it after I had listened to the Mindful Tarot's review of it. And the Mindful Tarot, she's really beautiful. She is a chaplain, and she is a Zen healer. She is very spiritual. She's so energetic. And I hope that all is well with her, because honestly, it's been about 5 to 7 months since she posted a video. And being a chaplain at a hospital and these times with pandemic, I pray that everything is okay, that she is okay, because I can only imagine that her absence is contributed to her working where she needs to at this time. But she did several reviews, and she actually, I think, I'll post a video below. She has a copy of the original Burgundy box, 1910. It's a crackle back, so it's not the real rare. The original run with the Lilies back, I think you would only see that in a museum. But she has one of the second run of the original Rider-Waite-Smith, which is so hard to find. I don't even want to know how much money she spent on that. But what she did is she went ahead and she purchased that deck, and she compares it to the 70s versions of the deck. And what she's doing is she's comparing the Pam A to the Pam A's, the 3 Pam A's. Also, you can compare this deck to Pam C or Pam B to really get a contrast. And again, there's going to be some honest feedback in this read, and I don't mean to criticize. Any of the publishers, because this isn't anybody's fault. But there is a deck by Los Scarabo called the Radiant Wise, and it's come under some criticism because no one understands why they call it Radiant Wise. It seems like kind of a funny subname. But the other thing is that it's almost like they put a lot of shadow into the deck, but it's quite clearly either a Pam B or a Pam C. It's not the Pam A quality. And honestly, I don't mean to be offensive. Again, this is just honest feedback. It's referred to in the tarot community lovingly as a dirty Pam. They call it a dirty Pam because when you look at it, it looks like an airbrush. It looks like they might have paid an artist to go over the lines of Pixie's artwork. Now, the other thing that's crazy about this is the A.G. Mueller deck, and what I purchased this because of the Mindful Tarot's review, because I wanted a clear deck. I did not, no offense, I did not want a dirty Pam. I wanted a Pam A version. Now, the only sacrifice that I have to make is that, and this is what's interesting and contributes to my conspiracy theory, is that if you look at the bottom of the deck, this is a Garamond font for the majors. When you get into the minors, it's just the artwork, which is lovely. It has a border, but when you look at the majors in traditional decks, and when you look at the traditional decks that are published by like the copyright holders like U.S. Games, And there are a few original versions. Unfortunately, a lot of the versions that you can buy of the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith have those blurry lines. But the other thing that they have that the A.G. Mueller, that my deck does not have, is what we call Pixie Font. And what that is that this font on the deck that I have, the images are clear. The images are beautiful, and they are originally Pamela Colman Smith's art, but they are not her lettering. Her lettering, which is lovingly referred to as her nickname, Pixie Font, is only on US Games or Low Scarabout images, and that's because they hold the copyright from 1970 of her original artwork. And what that tells me is that that's also what contributes to my conspiracy theory, is that the Switzerland team that had her artwork did not have her font, and her font was added by Rider Publishing Company when it went back to London. So what that tells me is that somehow the Switzerland and German company might have her original artwork. They have the plates. They have the plates that originally went missing in World War II. But that's just my conspiracy theory. But after watching the video from Mindful Tarot, she showed me how intricate the images were. And this is a long story, but I had to share it. That is why I bought this deck. So this is the deck that I bought for my channel. It's the reason that I bought the tarot this way, is because it has the original artwork. It does not have the Pixie Font. It is A.G. Mueller, and it has the little imperfection with the sun. It has the seeds in the sun. It has the cross hatching. When you look at strength, when you look at, you see the little nuances. And I just knew that when I owned the original Rider-Waite-Smith deck, that this is what I wanted, this is what I needed. I had to have the original artwork. And when I compare, when I look at these videos, I will pull out my deck, even though it doesn't, the Pixie Font is omitted. All the little nuances that compare to a Pam A is there. Now, to its credit, US Games has heard the outcry. Like, they probably read a million articles of tarot readers that have talked about this, because there's got to be a disconnect. They probably don't have their hands on the original artwork, or something in the scanning. Maybe this is a scanned replica. I don't know. But I did see that in the last year, I think it's 2019, US Games did come out with what they call an original Rider-Waite-Smith. And it has a lot of the detail that this has, the A.G. Mueller's German company, except it includes the Pixie Font. Now, I do not own that deck. There are reviews about it. Mindful Tarot did a review about it, and you please feel free to check out her channel. She's very experienced with this. But she seems to like it, which is a nod in their favor. I don't know if it compares to the A.G. Mueller. I'd have to do a comparison video for that. But I just wanted to say, I purchased this deck for $20. I bought it off eBay through a Ukraine company. It took 6 weeks to deliver, and it might take more, with shipping. But it is still the best deck, and I am grateful. I'm so grateful that I went with that deck, because it's still the best. It is exactly what I wanted, and it had all the detail. It does not have the Pixie Font, but it's something that I really cared about, and the quality of artwork. And again, with the minors being without, the minors have borders, it was a good investment. Now, whether or not you can still find this deck for the same amount, I'm not sure. You might have to go online. You might have to search a little bit for it. It's a very quality deck, but just bear in mind, it won't have the Pixie Font. You may want to check out US Games. They still have the copyright. Whether or not the copyright changes or there becomes a big legal battle, that is yet to be seen. But we would go ahead and, definitely, they're the owners of the artwork until 2020, I'm assuming until 2021, and they're definitely worth checking out. So that concludes the reason that I bought that original tarot deck, and why it's so special to me. And it is definitely, that's the crown jewel of all tarots, because it's really where it began, right? The game began in the 1600s, went through to the 1900s, you know, Pamela Colman Smith, author Edward Waite, Rider Publishing Company, all brought that into being. And here we are 115 years later still raving about it. So that's amazing, and that's the beginning of my tarot collection.